Where the hell are we?
I think we're into the city. Maybe some kind of underground base or something.
There's gotta be a way out.
All I can add at this stage is that if we simply look objectively at how animals, for one example, are treated by us humans on this planet, where we have huge industrial farms for the purpose of raising and slaughtering animals for a variety of resourcing purposes, how we use animals for experimentation or organ harvesting, or how we view ourselves as superior to them, and therefore we so easily justify their expendability.
They created something called the robo-rat. That was the first biohybrid. So a biohybrid is when you mix animal and a machine. And people freaked out. They were like, you cannot put brain chips in rats and make them move through a maze by a remote control, which is what they were doing. They now have pigeons that are mixed animal and machine. There's a moth, a large moth, and DARPA scientists put brain chips into the larva so that when it cocooned and became a flying moth, it had the chip built into its system. And this is now 4 years ago that I was interviewing these scientists.
Is it such a wild stretch to at least consider the possibility that we humans are also raised and farmed, in a sense, as someone's resource? When you really think about it, it could be that most of our resistances to even asking this question come from our hope that it's simply impossible and couldn't be true. It's all right for us to be the rulers of the world, but impossible for us to imagine that we may also be ruled in the same way that we rule others. A rather sickening thought, I know. But what does this idea help explain? What if Charles Fort and the numerous others who've speculated on this matter were really onto something? After everything that I've looked at and experienced, the way I see it is that there are three basic explanations for the same data that we have looked at in this chapter and so far in this series as a whole. And trust me, there's still so much more. But if we put it all together, if there is indeed a powerful ruling class or cult of some kind that oversees us humans on behalf of someone or something else, that something can really only be one of three things. Psychotic human overseers who simply view themselves as different or superior to the rest of us. Spiritual or interdimensional overseers who influence the superior human slaves who are left in charge of us all. Or physical, non-human intelligences who are not us. Now, what could explain such an anti-human agenda as we've seen better than the explanation that what we are dealing with is simply not human? Now, let's take this line of thought just a little bit further. What if it's a mix of all of these three categories, those being human controllers, spiritual beings, or extraterrestrial non-human beings? Another way that we could look at it is that these overseers and world powers are indeed human, but that they simply possess a belief that they are working on behalf of their gods or alien overlords, or whatever you want to call them, and are merely acting accordingly. Because, well, they're cultists. And that's what cultists and idea-possessed humans do, isn't it? What if this controlling force requires consent in some sort of karmic way in order to continue operating as our slave masters? If true, what if it's us that have called this all into being, or at least allow it to continue? Where then is this war really fought? It is my belief that it is fought in the domain of our hearts and our minds. And this then is where this war can finally be won.
psychologically healthy man is one who accepts the responsibility entailed in being a volitional being, who accepts the responsibility of thought, who accepts the responsibility of choice, who accepts and welcomes the responsibility of passing judgments. And that includes passing judgment on the issue of values, on the values and goals by which he is to live, that are going to guide his actions and his life. Now, it's possible for man, and indeed many men do, to revolt against the responsibility inherent in their own nature, to seek escape from the responsibility of volition, to evade the effort of thought, to prefer a state of mental fog, and to drift at the mercy of blind feelings. Confronted with the choice to initiate the mental effort needed to pursue knowledge, to focus his mind, to think or not to bother, the irrationalist characteristically chooses not to bother, particularly if crucial issues are at stake, because the risk is that much more terrifying, because he does not want his life or happiness to depend upon anything so fragile, as he sees it, as his own mind. Confronted with the choice to stand by the judgment of his mind or to act on feelings, wishes, or fears, which he knows to be irrational, he characteristically sticks by his feelings and defies his mind in validating its judgment. He gives in to fears which he knows to be irrational. And doing so again and again, he builds up in his mind this kind of precedent. Confronted with the choice between his own understanding and the assertions of others, he characteristically abandons his own understanding, finding it safer to pass the responsibility of judgment to others. This is one of the most widespread forms in which men can attempt to revolt against the requirements of their own nature. However, there is no escape from reality. There is no escape from man's nature and from the manner of survival that his nature requires. Every living species that possesses awareness can survive only by the guidance of its consciousness. That is the role and the function of consciousness in a living organism. Man can survive only by the guidance of his kind of consciousness. Now, they possess control of that mysterious, unknowable reality. Thus, he is led to shape his soul in the image of a parasite inconceivable in any other living species. Not a parasite of body, but a parasite of consciousness. The approval of others is his only form of assurance that he is right, that he is doing well. The temporary diminution of his anxiety that their approval offers him is his substitute for self-esteem. It is this kind of fear which lies at the root of the process by which men can surrender the world to evil. Not a practical fear, that must be emphasized. Not a practical fear, not the response to a tangible threat. Something absolutely non-practical on the deepest level. Prompted by a degrading fear they dare not acknowledge and so cannot overcome, invent non-existent dangers or grossly exaggerate minor ones, betray their own minds, sell out whatever authentic rationality they possess, and acquire a vested interest in believing that men are unavoidably evil, that human existence is evil, that the good has no chance on earth. Such is the manner in which men deliver the world to evil. There's a marvelous line describing the psychology of a dictator in Galt's speech. Galt states, "They, other people, are his only means of perception, and like a blind man who depends on the sight of a dog, he feels he must leash them in order to live." And that's a marvelous characterization of the psychology of the dictator or the power seeker. This is the person who feels helpless in reality, feels helpless in the position of seeking, in effect, voluntary help or approval from others, and who, in order to feel secure, needs to control those other consciousnesses which he dreads. Because if he can force them to obey him, if they can be coerced to act as though his ideas were true, why, that for all practical purposes will make them true. How unreal is the universe in which he lives, that if they can be compelled to fake a reality for him, that's as close to reality as he will ever get. Motivation by fear and hate is not intellectual sovereignty. And in that sense, the power luster is marvelously described as a parasite of lunacy who seeks a distortion created by others, who is willing to have those others coerced, who is cheerfully willing to have articles praising him, eulogies praising him, songs and hymns written to him, prepared at gunpoint, and still he smiles and basks in it, and this gives him his sense of efficacy. He is able to control those other consciousnesses and thus to gain some sense of security. The root of all the human evils and ills which people exhibit is men's desire to escape from the responsibility of a volitional consciousness.
We are in this, what I really think is the battle at the Black Gate, the great battle of our time. We are in a spiritual war. We have been in a spiritual war for millennia. And it seems to me, and this is, based on a lot of the astrological dynamics that are at work, that this is like the final battle. I have a sense that this is culminating right now, and that this next 3 years, from 2022 to 2025, when Pluto finally fully enters Aquarius, that we are going to be doing battle. The journey to the underworld, as it is represented, particularly in different myths, but because I love the Lord of the Rings so much, we saw in that story Aragorn, after he receives the reforged blade to become the king, what is the first thing he has to do? He has to go to the underworld. So this underworld journey is really a process of metamorphosis that every individual has to do in terms of their own inner work, their inner transformation, becoming a whole human being, conscious human being. It is a metamorphosis. It is like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, or the snake shedding its skin. So these symbols and images are around us, and especially right now. You can follow this back, generation to generation to generation. I mean, ancient wounds that have never been dealt with, trauma that gets passed on because nobody was ever able to actually bring it to consciousness and work through it and overcome that bondage to terror, rage, and grief, and to all the mechanisms, the psychological defenses that we use to cover that up, to keep papering that over. It's like, oh, I don't want to go down there. Don't want to feel those unpleasant feelings. There is some wound that has not been dealt with, that's been festering in the dark corner of the basement for generations and generations.